Developing a strategy for open innovation. Let's remind ourselves once again of the challenges that Spaghetti World poses. We're talking about a multiplayer game in which we have to think about open innovation. This is all about complex knowledge flow, not just knowledge creation. And it's about enabling connection and interactivity inside and outside the organization. It's not always about new knowledge, sometimes it's about using what we already have in different ways, recombinant innovation. But the big question we've been trying to address isn't the potential of this opportunity, but how to make it happen. And we've seen in previous films the wide range of new tools and powerful tools which can help us deal with open innovation. But simply throwing tools at the challenge isn't going to be enough. What we really need to do is ask ourselves some key strategic questions. We've got limited resources, so we have to use some kind of strategic approach to open innovation. Perhaps the first question is, what are we trying to achieve with it? Why bother with this opening up, given that it's going to cost us resources to make it happen? And then which models are going to work? There are many models. We've been looking at open innovation for nearly 20 years. Which of the various models work best for our particular challenges? The question then of finding partners for our networks, forming relationships with them, and getting those networks to perform is not a trivial one. And we have to deal with something called absorptive capacity. Are we capable of making use of new knowledge coming from outside the organization? Well, let's start with that first question. Why open up? What's the reasons we might have for going for an open innovation approach? Well, the first thing to recognize is there are many things that would drive an organization towards open innovation. We've seen, for example, the challenge which is posed in Bill Joy's memorable words, even in the largest organization, not all the smart guys work for us. So we need to find who's got the knowledge that we might need outside our organization and amplify what we can do through that. We also need to match up what they have got outside with what we have inside to complement our internal capacity. We might also want new directions, very much the approach taken across many innovation markets. It's not replacing our own capacity for innovation, but extending it and amplifying it in new directions, getting different people to see new angles on our challenges. It's also about finding markets for things we know about, but we're not using, for unused or underused internal knowledge. And it's certainly about pushing the frontiers, trying to do the high-risk work of breaking completely new ground that benefits from some form of collaborative exploration. So there are these and many other reasons why organizations ought to be clear why they're going for this panacea, or this apparent panacea, of open innovation. And that leads us to a variety of options. Here's a very simple 2x2 matrix which captures some of them. How far on the horizontal axis we're looking to complement what we do, as opposed to even substituting for it or bringing in something very new that we haven't got. And the vertical axis, how far we're going to do this in the form of contracts and formal relationships, and how far we're going to require networks and other kind of working. We need to recognize that simple split between open or closed approaches isn't really helpful, and it's certainly not realistic. In reality, and after 20 years of experience in trying to make open innovation happen, there are a number of potential models. And one of the key strategic questions is which models will help us achieve what we want to do best. Some of those models, well, one is called the orchestra model. And it's typified by the kind of thing that Boeing do in trying to build or design and build the 787 Dreamliner. This is essentially an active network of suppliers who are partners in the creation and the improvement process for that project. And essentially the metaphor here is very much one of an orchestra conductor, Boeing at the center, retaining the final integration and decision making, but drawing all sorts of players around it. In complete contrast, the creative bazaar, the kind of marketplace, is essentially somewhere where shopping for ideas can happen. The kind of thing we've seen in the innovation markets we've already looked at, where organizations like Innocentive offer such a potentially powerful role and where crowdsourcing is important. A third model, sometimes called Jam Central, is all about offering challenges to communities inside organizations and outside, a kind of innovation contest-based approach where a lot of people working together, often against the clock, try and come up with interesting and challenging new ideas. Another model is something which is called ModStation, which draws on a term which comes originally from personal computing, where users make modifications to games and other hardware. And that's very typical of the open source approach, and increasingly what a large number of software and even hardware organizations do, trying to mobilize people not just as passive users, but as active sources of innovation. Another approach might be what we might call high involvement collaboration, where we're drawing in different perspectives and different stakeholders across collaboration platforms, where the kind of innovation platforms we saw earlier provide the infrastructure across which people can co-create ideas. A typical example here would be the kind of platforms used extensively for employee involvement. Another model is what might be called an infusion model, where essentially organizations like NASA focus and orchestrate co-development programs, pushing the frontier but mobilizing many different players inside and outside their organization. Now, there are a variety of different models and different pieces of research which highlight these, but the main question for any organization is to make sure it doesn't believe that one size fits all. Instead, it looks for models that can help it do it. Now, there's another challenge which emerges when you start trying to work with other organizations outside. It's a matter of how you find, how you form relationships with those partners, and how you get those relationships to perform. And that isn't always easy. This little picture here suggests that there may be 4 different zones which are going to use different approaches and be easy or more difficult in terms of how we might find our partners and how easy it might be to engage with them. And there are a number of barriers, as this picture suggests, which might get in the way of finding prospective partners or of forming productive relationships with them. So it's very important in considering our strategy for open innovation to be aware of some of these challenges, to think through what it might mean if different groups are coming together with perhaps very different objectives, like the public sector trying to work alongside the private sector, or with different values and beliefs, or different geographical locations. So all of this would argue that finding, forming and building performing networks is not a simple matter of plug and play. Once again, it's all about a strategic approach. Finally, we ought to think in building our strategy of some key considerations. The first is, what are we trying to do and what are the conditions under which we're working? Is it a very simple and straightforward project, or is it a highly complex and uncertain environment with a very difficult project? Who's going to control and own the resources, and making sure there are well worked out relationships and contracts to deal with that? How are we going to coordinate the knowledge flows from outside into our organization and the other way around? And most important of all, how do we make sure that our shared activities, our collaborative activities, really create and allow for the capture of value through innovation? So, as we've seen throughout, realizing the open innovation opportunity isn't quite as straightforward as it seems. It's much more than a slogan or a label. If we're serious about it, we need a strategy.